Citizens call for freedom across the globe. Pro-democracy protesters continued risking their safety to demand basic human rights, improved job opportunities, and representative governments for themselves and fellow citizens in countries like Albania, Bahrain, Cameroon, Hungary, Iran, Jordan, Libya, Palestine, and Syria. Tens of thousands of Palestinians rallied in Gaza and the West Bank, calling for reconciliation between the Hamas and Fatah parties to form a unity government and proceed toward an independent state. As more and more countries upgrade Palestine's diplomatic status to show recognition of her autonomy, French Foreign Minister Alain Juppé stated that if peace talks between Palestine and Israel do not progress, European Union leaders may also recognize Palestine as an independent state. In accordance with the wishes of Palestinian protesters calling for an end to the division between Hamas and Fatah parties, President Mahmoud Abbas accepts an invitation to go to Gaza and meet immediately with Hamas Party Prime Minister Ismail Haniyeh for reunification talks. President Abbas also stated he is ready to delay the formation of a new government to give the Hamas Party a chance to join.
In Egypt, progress continues in addressing citizens' demands less than 5 weeks after a peaceful protest movement began to transform the government toward a democracy. Following calls from the Coptic Christian community for protection from harm and equal treatment, a branch of the Egyptian armed forces began to rebuild a Coptic Christian church that had burned to the ground during unrest between Muslims and Christians, and pledged to bear all expenses for its restoration. On Tuesday, the Interior Ministry announced the replacement of its much-feared security agency with a new body, established to serve the country while respecting the rights of citizens. Egypt was also lauded by U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton for the dramatic transition made over the past few weeks, as the Secretary of State donated $90 million in emergency economic assistance on behalf of the U.S. government, pledging continued U.S. support.
In Jordan, King Abdullah II has set a 90-day due time for a newly formed committee of government officials and minority parties to draft new laws that will facilitate fair representation for all Jordanians within a structure that includes parliamentary elections and political parties. Meanwhile, in Syria, around 40 people successfully staged the first pro-democracy march through Old Damascus, calling for improved economic opportunities and education, as well as the end of emergency law and special tribunals. The same day, Syrian Foreign Minister Walid Muallim stated the government is taking steps toward political reform, beginning with amendments to laws on municipal and legislative elections expected later this year. The following day, the number of protesters in Damascus grew to 150 as people gathered in the front of the Interior Ministry calling for the release of political prisoners, but they were dispersed by police, with 35 being arrested.
In the capital Budapest, thousands of Hungarians gathered in the largest protest since 1989 to call for changes in national media laws to ensure they cannot be used to censor free speech. And in Albania, a month after 4 pro-democracy protesters were killed during a march, police stood by as tens of thousands of protesters reiterated a call for early, free, and fair elections.
Following the imposition of martial law in the Kingdom of Bahrain, national troops backed by helicopters and tanks entered the Pearl roundabout, where 500 unarmed pro-democracy protesters had been camped out, and began firing tear gas and buckshot to clear the square. Al Jazeera reports at least 6 people lost their lives, including 2 police officers who were hit by a car as people fled the scene. Saudi troops, who were in Bahrain at the request of the government, surrounded the main Salmania hospital, locking in doctors and patients as they reportedly went to find the protest organizers, with Press TV reporting that the troops left with 1 body and several injured persons. According to the latest media reports, Bahrain has imposed a curfew in parts of the capital from 4 p.m. to 4 a.m. According to Al Bayt news agencies, 12 judges on the country's Sharia court have resigned in protest of the government's use of violence against its own people.
Press TV reports at least 6 members of the Shura Council, who are appointed by the monarch, similarly resigned, along with the nation's health minister, while the housing minister announced a boycott of cabinet meetings. Top Shia cleric Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani and 5 of Bahrain's head clerics have called upon the government to stop the violence, while various news agencies have reported that Bahraini citizens are appealing to the international community for help. Across the Middle East, in countries such as Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Kuwait, Iran, and Iraq, solidarity protests were held calling for Saudi troops to withdraw and for a stop of the use of force, according to Press TV. Saying that such means cannot substitute for negotiation toward democratic goals, U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton stated that Bahrain and other countries with military presence, they were on the wrong track to employ violence, as she urged the Bahraini government to return to dialogue for a peaceful resolution. U.S. President Barack Obama also telephoned both King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia and King Hamad of Bahrain to express his deep concern over the violence, while urging maximum restraint and supporting the National Dialogue Initiative of Bahrain's Crown Prince Salman.
In Iran, the Green Wave movement had organized protests to call for an end to house arrests for Minority Party leaders Mir Hossein Mousavi and Mehdi Karabi, but their marches failed to materialize in the face of high presence of security forces. A local doctor in Yemen's western city of Al Hudaydah told Reuters news agency that hundreds of armed security forces and plainclothes police used tear gas, rubber bullets, live ammunition, and bats to attack demonstrators camped in the city's main square, injuring at least 120 people.
Côte d'Ivoire or Ivory Coast, as supporters of the internationally recognized president-elect Alassane Ouattara begin to advance into neighborhoods that had been controlled by supporters of incumbent President Laurent Gbagbo. Gunshots fired from a taxi at a roadblock in the capital, Abidjan, result in the death of 4 youths. Algerian police in the capital, Algiers, used tear gas on a group of 150 protesters who had gathered for a meeting with senior officials to demand better housing.
Al Jazeera reports that Libyan forces heading toward Benghazi began heavy bombardments of Misrata on Tuesday after shutting off water supplies and blocking communications in the city of 300,000, with several people killed.
In Ashbaya, Libya, protesters who have been enduring airstrikes and other military attacks from the government as they call for an urgent no-fly zone from the international community have begun fleeing with other citizens to the eastern city of Benghazi. Some citizens are now also fleeing from Benghazi toward neighboring Egypt as heavily armed government forces close in on the city.
Libyan state television reported Wednesday that the government now controlled the town of Ajdabiya, but Reuters news agency later reported that they are still fighting and this has not occurred. Stating that he's gravely concerned by signs that the government is planning an assault on Benghazi, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon called for a ceasefire on Wednesday. U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton also stated that the situation in Libya is critical because of the government forces advancing toward the pro-democracy stronghold in Benghazi, as French President Nicolas Sarkozy urgently called upon the UN Security Council for a no-fly zone in Libya to protect the lives of the brave pro-democracy protesters. The International Committee of the Red Cross meanwhile announced that non-essential expatriate staff have been moved from Benghazi to the nearby city of Tobruk. As refugees continue fleeing the country, a ship carrying Moroccan nationals that approached Italy was blocked from entering port to refuel as Italian officials refused out of concern for the number of refugees already in the country. Moroccan ambassador to Italy, Hassan Abouyub, reported that his government was working with Italian officials to resolve the issue.
Meanwhile, the newly appointed United Nations Special Envoy to Libya, former Jordanian Foreign Minister Abdul Ilah Khatib, arrived in the Libyan capital of Tripoli, calling for an immediate end to violence and protection of citizens.
Our sad sympathies for the loss of cherished lives as we pray for the protection of all citizens and that the conflict cease, bringing harmony, dignity, and freedom among all nations of the world.